Let me tell you about a 75-year-old corn and soybean farmer named Halvor Otto Steinbrenner, who walked into a John Deere dealership on a Tuesday morning in March of 1979, wearing his late father's worn herringbone drill jacket, asked the price of a new 4640 tractor, and was quoted $7,850 above the published invoice by a 33-year-old salesman in a sky blue blazer who had decided that a man in a mended coat could not read the brochure in his hand. Halvor folded the brochure into the inside pocket of the drill jacket. He thanked the salesman politely. He walked out of the showroom. He drove home at the legal speed in a 1968 Chevrolet C30 pickup that had hauled hogs to the Atlantic stockyards for 11 straight Saturdays in the fall of 1958. And 11 weeks later, on a Wednesday morning in June, he walked back through the same front door of the same showroom in the same drill jacket, set 2 manila envelopes on the same wooden counter, and bought the same tractor at the price it should have been quoted in the first place. He had also, by then, bought the dealership. This is the story of how he did it. Halvor Steinbrenner was born on the farm in 1903. The farm sits on 480 acres of Audubon County, Iowa, loam 2.5 miles north of the small town of Hamlin, on a county road that runs flat between 2 creek bottoms and a stand of bur oak his grandfather Otto had let alone since 1899. Otto Steinbrenner had come from a tinsmith's village outside Würzburg in 1882 with $26 sewn into the lining of his coat and a leather satchel of soldering tools that are still in the loft above the milk house. He bought the first 80 acres in 1899 from a railroad land office in Council Bluffs for $940, walked the boundary by lantern that same evening, and slept the first night on the prairie under a tarpaulin with his wife Margaretha and one small boy of 3. That boy was Friedrich Steinbrenner, Halvor's father. Friedrich grew up speaking Bavarian German in the kitchen and Iowa English in the schoolhouse, took over the farm at 19 when Otto's hands went bad from 25 winters of milking, and expanded the place from 80 acres to 320 by 1924. He bought distressed quarter sections at tax sales through the Depression at $4 and $5 an acre when nobody else in the county had the cash, and brought the farm to 400 acres by 1942. He paid off the last mortgage on the home 80 in May of 1958. He died of a heart attack on the kitchen floor of the farmhouse on the morning of February the 11th, 1960, 3 days after his 72nd birthday, with a coffee cup still warm beside him on the oilcloth. Halvor took over that same morning. He was 56 years old, married 29 years, to Edna Hauge of Walnut, Iowa, the daughter of a Norwegian carpenter who had built half the grain elevators in 3 counties. He and Edna had one daughter, Greta Friederike Steinbrenner, born on the kitchen floor of the same farmhouse on the 11th of November, 1932. Greta died of pneumonia in the upstairs bedroom of the same farmhouse on the 22nd of January, 1941, 3 months past her 9th birthday, with the wind off the prairie hammering the storm windows and her mother holding her hand under the same heavy quilt that still folds at the foot of Halvor's bed. Edna never had another child after that. She and Halvor went on. She tended the chickens and the kitchen garden and the canning room and a small herb bed beside the back step. She mended his clothes at the kitchen table by the south window every Sunday afternoon for 44 more years, until the morning of February the 4th, 1976, when she went out to the kitchen at 5:45 to put the percolator on and did not come back. Halvor found her on the linoleum beside the stove an hour later, a coffee can of grounds tipped on its side and the percolator already whistling. The doctor in Atlantic called it a massive cerebral hemorrhage. She was 68 years old. They had been married 45 years. After Edna's funeral, Halvor hired Inga Knutsen, a 55-year-old widow from a farm out by Brayton, to come in 5 days a week to cook and keep the house. He gave her the old summer kitchen building 200 feet behind the main house to live in, and he kept on farming. He had no children. He had no debt. He had 800 head of feeder hogs and 480 acres of corn and soybean rotation and a tinsmith satchel in the loft above the milk house. And he had, though he had told nobody alive, $2,180,000 in a black cloth-bound ledger on the kitchen shelf above the icebox. That ledger had been started by his father, Friedrich, on the 14th of May, 1947. Halvor's grandfather, Otto, had died in 1932 of a stroke at the kitchen table, 67 years old, 3 weeks after the family had been forced to sell the last 6 head of heritage Berkshire boars they had brought over from Bavaria in 1883. The hogs sold for $1,026. Friedrich kept the money in a mason jar in the cellar for 15 years. In the spring of 1947, with the war over and the country opening up again, he drove the family Ford to Des Moines on a Wednesday morning, walked into the brokerage office of Bosch & Company on Locust Street, and bought 104.7 shares of the Wellington Fund at $9.80 a share. The receipt is folded inside the front cover of the ledger. Friedrich added between $200 and $500 every spring from 1947 through 1960. By the morning he died on the kitchen floor, the account was worth $34,800, and he had told nobody. The ledger was in a tin box in the drawer of the kitchen hutch. Halvor found it on the 3rd day after the funeral. He read it through twice that night by the kitchen lamp. He kept the account. He added to it. He bought 100 shares of Putnam Growth Fund in 1962 with the proceeds of a fat hog year. He enrolled in AT&T's direct stock purchase plan in 1969 and bought 10 or 15 shares every quarter through the 70s. He added a Templeton Growth Fund position in 1974. He reinvested every dividend. He never sold a share. The inflation of the late 1970s, which was bleeding most American families dry, was instead silently doubling the buying power of an old farmer's portfolio, because his portfolio was full of things that grew faster than the cost of bread. By the second week of March, 1979, the ledger on the kitchen shelf above the icebox showed a total market value of $2,180,490. Halvor had not told Edna while she lived. He had not told Inga. He had not told Asa Trommer, the neighbor 3 miles east, or Cornelius Rieksteins, his lawyer up in Des Moines, or the Reverend Wendt at Bethel Lutheran, or anyone in the county. The ledger sat on the shelf above the icebox between a tin of coffee and a box of soda crackers. The book was black cloth. It said nothing on the spine. Inga dusted around it once a week. And on the morning of Tuesday, the 13th of March, 1979, Halvor put on the worn herringbone drill jacket his father Friedrich had bought at the Junkers department store in Des Moines on the 12th of November, 1949, and drove the C-30 pickup into Atlantic, Iowa, to look at a John Deere 4640. The drill jacket needs a paragraph of its own. Friedrich had paid $16.40 for it at Junkers in the fall of '49 because his old work coat had finally given out at the shoulder after 7 Iowa winters. The drill was a heavy, tan and brown herringbone cotton twill with a flannel lining, 2 flap pockets on the chest, 2 slash pockets on the hips, and a button-down storm tab at the throat. Friedrich wore it 11 winters. After Friedrich died in '60, Halvor took it off the peg by the back door and never put it back on a hanger. He had worn it 19 winters by the spring of '79. Both flap pockets had been restitched by Edna at the kitchen table, the right one in October 1968, the left in November 1973. The right cuff lining had been replaced twice, once in March of '68 after the cuff lining tore on a barbed wire fence, and again in March of '73 when the second lining gave out. The left interior pocket had been relined the same March of '73. The coat was mended but clean. It smelled faintly of wood smoke and lanolin and the kitchen. He drove into Atlantic that morning to look at the John Deere 4640 because his 5620 had finally cracked a block in February and he needed a bigger tractor for spring planting on the 480. The published invoice for a new 4640 in March '79 was $44,950. He had brought $30,000 in cash in a leather envelope in his inside coat pocket because he intended to write a cashier's check for the full balance at the Audubon State Bank that same afternoon and bring the tractor home on a lowboy by the weekend. Heartland Equipment was on Highway 71 on the south edge of Atlantic, a long, low brick and glass showroom with 2 service bays and a fenced lot of new green and yellow machinery stretching back toward the railroad tracks. Halvor parked the C-30 in the customer lot at 29 minutes past 9 and walked into the showroom at 28 minutes to 10. The first thing he saw was a 4640 on the polished concrete floor under the showroom lights, its green paint deep as a creek pool in summer, its yellow wheels clean as a parade float. He stood and looked at it for 2.5 minutes before anyone came over. The salesman who came over was Burton Allen Cowherd, 33 years old, a graduate of the Iowa State University College of Business in 1971. He wore a sky blue blazer over a French blue shirt with a navy tie and gray slacks. He was the son of Roy Cowherd, who was the longtime general manager of the Atlantic store and an 8% equity holder in Heartland Equipment Incorporated. Bert had been hired by his father in '76 and had worked his way up to senior sales by the spring of '79. He was paid on commission with a 4.5% override on every unit he wrote. Bert looked at Halvor, the worn drill jacket with the mended cuff, the cap with the John Deere sweatband faded to almost no color, the C-30 pickup visible through the showroom window with rust on the rocker panels. And he made a decision in the next 2 seconds about who this man was and what he could afford. The decision was wrong, and it was the most expensive decision Bert Cowherd would make in his 33 years on the earth. "Help you with something, sir," Bert said. "I'd like to know the price on the 4640, Halvor said. Bert smiled. "She's a nice machine. I'll have to check what we've got her at currently. There's been some adjustment with the new model year coming. Hold on just a minute." He went to the desk by the window. He came back with a clipboard. We're at $52,800 for the 4640 as she sits, sir. That's the premium tier, non-finance walk-in. We've got financing available through Iowa Farm Credit, Prime Plus 4, which is at 16.5 right now. If you want to take a brochure home and think on it, I can write down the financing payment. Halvor was quiet for a moment. He took the brochure out of his hand. He had read it the night before by the kitchen lamp. The published invoice on the back cover, in the small print at the bottom, was $44,950. My neighbor Asa Trumer bought a 4630 from this dealership in November, Halvor said. He paid $39,500. He still has the invoice on his kitchen shelf. The 4640 is on the same chassis as the 4630, with the bigger displacement. The published price on the 4640 is $44,950. I have it here in the brochure. Bert's smile got a quarter-inch wider. Old model, sir. Last year's invoice. We re-tier each season. That ship has sailed. Halvor looked at him a moment longer. He looked at the 4640 on the showroom floor. He folded the brochure carefully and tucked it into the inside pocket of the drill jacket beside the leather envelope with the $30,000 cash. He nodded once. "Thank you for your time," he said. He turned and walked out. The whole exchange had taken 11 minutes. He drove the C-30 home at the legal speed. He did not stop at the bank. He did not stop at the feed store. He did not stop at Asa Trumer's place. He drove the 4 miles north to the farm, parked the truck in front of the milk house, walked into the kitchen, hung the drill jacket on the peg by the back door, hung the cap on the peg above it, and sat down at the kitchen table. Inga was at the counter making bread. He drank a cup of coffee in silence. At 10 minutes past 3 that afternoon, he picked up the wall phone in the kitchen and dialed a number in Des Moines that he had not dialed for 19 months. The man who answered was Cornelius Rieksteins. Korn was 71 years old, the son of a Latvian metal worker who had come through Ellis Island in 1923. He kept a small 2-room law office on Locust Street, 4 blocks from the brokerage, where Friedrich Steinbrenner had bought the first 100 shares of Wellington Fund in May of '47. Korn wore a gray wool cardigan, year-round in the office. He had been Halvor's lawyer since 1955. He had drawn up the deed when Halvor and Edna had quietly bought the back 80 from the Siebold estate in '62. He had written Edna's will in '74. He had not heard from Halvor since the closing of the small Schultz tract in August of '77. "Korn," Halvor said, "I need you to drive down here Saturday. Bring a yellow pad." "I can," Korn said. "More. What for?" "I'd like to buy a John Deere dealership," Halvor said. There was a small pause on the line. "Which one?" Korn said. "Heartland Equipment. 4 stores. Atlantic, Carroll, Glidden, Manning. Headquartered in Omaha." "Hal," Korn said. "Heartland is a $15 million company. The flagship store alone is on 6 acres of Atlantic frontage." "I know what it is." Another small pause. "Hal, has something happened?" "A salesman in a sky blue blazer quoted me $7,850 over published invoice on a 4640 this morning," Halvor said. "He thought my coat meant I couldn't read." "Hal," Korn said. "I'll see you Saturday at 10, Halvor said. "I'll have coffee on." He hung up. Korn drove down on the Saturday morning. He pulled into the farmyard at 9:56 in a slate gray 1975 Buick Electra. He carried a brown leather briefcase and a yellow legal pad and a thermos of coffee that Inga did not let him pour, because the percolator on the kitchen stove had been on since 6. They sat at the kitchen table. Inga set out a plate of caramel rolls and went out to feed the chickens. Halvor took the black ledger down from the shelf above the icebox for the first time in front of another living person and slid it across the oilcloth to Corn. Corn read for 45 minutes without saying a word. He read the Wellington Fund opening receipt of May 14th, 1947. He read every entry Friedrich had made between 47 and 60. He read every entry Halvor had made between 60 and 79. He read the Putnam Growth purchases of 62. He read the AT&T direct purchase entries of 69 through 78. He read the Templeton Growth position. He read the dividend reinvestment notations going back 32 years. He totaled the bottom of the last page in his head, $2,180,490. He closed the ledger gently. He laid his hand flat on the cover. "Hal," he said. "That's right," Halvor said. "Edna didn't know." "No. Inga doesn't know. No." Corn looked at him for a long moment, over the horn-rimmed glasses. Then he opened the yellow pad and uncapped a cross fountain pen and wrote at the top of the page, in capital letters, "Steinbrenner Capital LLC," and underlined it once. "All right, Hal," he said, "let's see what they own, and where it's weak." They worked at the kitchen table until 5 in the afternoon. Corn made 23 pages of notes. He went home that evening with the ledger photocopied at the Atlantic Public Library on the way back to Des Moines. What he learned over the next 2 weeks by quiet inquiry through 3 Des Moines colleagues and a retired loan officer in Atlantic named Vernon Niedermeyer was this. Heartland Equipment Incorporated was a Delaware C corporation founded in 1968 by Marvin Hollingsworth, 52, of Omaha. Hollingsworth held 38% of the stock. Lyle Bauer, semi-retired in Naples, Florida, held 22% and had been wanting to sell for 2 years but had no clean buyer. Wayne Eichelberger, a Council Bluffs CPA, held 18%. Gordon Sprick, an Atlantic small business consultant whose wife had filed for divorce in February, held 12% and was sitting on $115,000 of personal debt. Roy Cowherd, the Atlantic GM, held 8%, and 2% was held by the Trust Department of First National Bank of Lincoln, Nebraska, on behalf of the great-grandson of a deceased original investor. The debt side. First Audubon State Bank held a $1,900,000 operating line of credit and $2,400,000 of floor plan financing on the inventory. The bank's new president, Dale Clemme, 49, had been quietly worried for 6 months about Heartland's debt service coverage ratio, which was running at 0.92 against a covenant minimum of 1.20. Clemme would, Vernon Niedermeyer said over coffee at the Atlantic Cafe on a Thursday morning, sell the operating line at par to almost anyone who would take it off his books. Corn called Halvor on the evening of the 28th of March and laid out the plan in 8 steps over the kitchen telephone. Halvor listened without interrupting for 22 minutes. When Corn finished, Halvor said, "Start with the estate trust. Do that first. Use $480,000. Corn started with the estate trust on the 2nd of April. Steinbrenner Capital LLC had been incorporated at the Iowa Secretary of State's office in Des Moines on the 19th of March. The Lincoln, Nebraska Bank Trust Department was happy to liquidate the 2% block at $48,000 cash. Closing was the 9th. Corn called on Gordon Sprick at his small office on Atlantic Main Street on the 16th of April. Sprick was wearing a wrinkled blue shirt and had not slept well. Corn introduced himself, sat down, and offered $480,000 cash for Sprick's 12%. Sprick stared at the offer letter for 90 seconds without speaking. He signed 2 days later at Corn's office on Locust Street. Corn flew to Naples on the 23rd of April and met Lyle Bauer at the country club for lunch. Bauer had been waiting for Halvor's offer for 26 months and did not know it. Corn slid a single sheet across the white tablecloth. Bauer read it once. He signed it before the soup arrived. $920,000 cash. Wire transfer to Bauer's Florida account by Friday. Close. By the 7th of May, Steinbrenner Capital LLC owned 36% of Heartland Equipment Incorporated. Corn filed for a special shareholder meeting and served notice. He requested a seat at the table for SCC's designated director, retired loan officer Vernon Niedermeyer of Atlantic. The special meeting was on the 14th of May in Heartland's conference room above the Atlantic Showroom. Wayne Eichelberger walked in carrying a manila folder and a calculator. He had been doing the math for 3 nights. He sat down across from Corn and Vernon and said, "What's my number?" Corn slid an envelope across the table. Eichelberger opened it. $750,000 cash. He nodded once, signed the term sheet on the spot, and walked out without speaking to Hollingsworth. By the end of the meeting, Steinbrenner Capital LLC owned 54% of Heartland Equipment Incorporated, and Marvin Hollingsworth was sitting in the conference room at 3 minutes past 4 with his face the color of new concrete. 2 days later, on the 16th of May, Corn drove to First Audubon State Bank and met Dale Clem in the bank president's office. Clem had heard about the special meeting. He had been waiting for the call. SCC offered to buy the $1.9 million operating line at par. Clem jumped at it. Closing was the 22nd of May. SCC now held 54% of the equity and $1,900,000 of senior debt secured against the same equipment Hollingsworth had personally guaranteed. The Hollingsworth workout took 6 days. His Omaha attorneys came at Corn 3 different ways. Corn waited each one out across the desk in his Locust Street office, in a gray cardigan with a single cup of coffee in front of him and a yellow legal pad open. On the 28th of May, Hollingsworth signed for $1,600,000 and the release of his personal guarantees on the credit line. He had paid himself $2,200,000 into Heartland over 11 years. He walked away with $1,600,000. He drove back to Omaha in a black Lincoln Town car at 6 minutes past 7 on a Tuesday evening. Closing for the full transaction was Friday, the 1st of June, 1979, at 10 in the morning in Corn Riekstein's office on Locust Street. Halvor wore a gray wool suit Edna had bought him at Yonkers in 1964. He signed as managing member of Steinbrenner Capital LLC. On paper, by 10:35 that morning, he was the 92% owner of a 4-store John Deere franchise. Roy Cowherd's 8% remained. Halvor had decided. Roy had not done the lowballing. Halvor drove home that Friday afternoon. He hung the gray suit on the closet door. He took down the drill jacket from the peg by the back door and laid it across the kitchen chair. He drank coffee with Inga. He went to bed at 8:45. The walk-in was Wednesday morning, the 6th of June, at 13 minutes past 10. He drove the C-30 pickup. He wore the drill jacket. The cap was on the seat beside him. He carried 2 manila envelopes in the inside pocket of the coat. The thick envelope was the certified ownership confirmation showing Steinbrenner Capital LLC's 92% stake and his signature as managing member. The thin envelope was the letter of for-cause termination for Burton Allen Cowherd, citing material misrepresentation in customer pricing documentation across 23 transactions, documented by Korn Rieksteins and Vernon Niedermeyer between January of 77 and April of 79, of which the 13th of March quotation to Halvor Otto Steinbrenner was exhibit number 1. Behind Halvor came Vernon Niedermeyer in a brown sport coat and a clipboard. Behind Vernon came Asa Trommer, the neighbor, with the November 78 brochure folded in the breast pocket of his denim work jacket, because Asa had wanted to be there. They walked through the showroom door at 13 minutes past 10. The 4640 on the floor was still the same one. The polished concrete was the same. The plate glass window onto the lot was the same. Burton Cowherd was behind the front desk in a sky blue blazer and a French blue shirt and a navy tie. He looked up. He recognized Halvor on the second look, vaguely. He did not understand what was happening yet. Halvor walked to the counter. He did not take off his coat. He set the 2 envelopes down on the wood beside the brochure stand. He laid Asa Trommer's November brochure on top of them. Roy Cowherd came out from the back office at the noise of the door. He stopped 6 feet from his son. He looked at Halvor. He looked at the envelopes. He looked at Vernon Niedermeyer in the brown sport coat. He understood it in 3.5 seconds, and his face went still and old. Halvor spoke for the first time since he had walked through the door. "Roy, you stay. Your boy goes. 6-month probation for you. New pricing policy posted tomorrow. Every customer in the last 18 months who paid above MSRP gets a refund. Bookkeeper has the list. Vernon will witness." Roy nodded once. He did not look at his son. Halvor turned to Burton. 5 p.m. Office cleaned out. Box your personal items. Vernon will witness that too. Burton tried to say something. His mouth opened. Halvor lifted one weathered hand and held it flat, palm down, an inch above the counter. "I came in here on the 13th of March in this same coat," Halvor said. "You quoted me $52,800 on the 4640. The published invoice was $44,950. You told me there was a premium for non-finance walk-ins. I had brought $30,000 cash for a deposit. I'm prepared today to pay the published $44,950 cash for the 4640 on the showroom floor. Vernon will write the invoice. Roy will sign as general manager. The tractor will be loaded onto a lowboy by noon and delivered to my farm by 4. That is all." He took the leather envelope out of the inside pocket of the drill jacket. He set it on the counter beside the manila envelopes. $44,950 in $100 bills. Vernon wrote the invoice at the desk by the window. Roy signed it as general manager at 23 minutes past 10. The 4640 was loaded onto the lowboy by 11:40. Burton Cowherd was out of his office and out of the building by 4:12 that afternoon. The new pricing policy was posted on the showroom wall by 9 the next morning. Halvor drove the 4640 off the lowboy in the farmyard at 6 minutes past 4. The driver of the lowboy had been respectful. Halvor tipped him $40 and went into the house. He hung the drill jacket on the peg by the back door. He hung the cap on the peg above it. He sat down at the kitchen table and drank a cup of coffee in silence. At 5:45, Asa Trommer arrived. Inga set the table for 3. They ate cold ham and potato salad, and pickled beets and fresh bread. They did not talk much. After supper, Halvor set 4 white enamel coffee cups on the oilcloth at the 4 places at the table. He filled 3 of them from the percolator. The 4th he filled and set at the place by the south window. The place was Edna's. He raised his cup. To my daddy, who walked into the Wellington Fund office in Des Moines on the 14th of May, 1947, with $1,026 from the last of the heritage hogs. Inga and Asa raised theirs. To Corn Rieksteins, who put the whole thing together in 11 weeks in a gray cardigan from a 2-room office on Locust Street. They raised them again. To Vernon Niedermeyer, who has the showroom now. They raised them again. To Edna. The 4th cup sat steaming on the oilcloth at her place. Inga and Asa held theirs in the air a long moment. To Edna, Asa said. To Edna, Inga said. They drank. The next morning, Halvor drove the 4640 out into the South 80 before the sun was full up. The corn was already 6 inches above the soil and a good even green from the late spring rain. He worked the rows until 11. He came in for lunch. He went back out at 1. He worked until dark. The drill jacket hung on the peg by the back door all day. And that, friends, that is the story of how a John Deere dealership on Highway 71 in Atlantic, Iowa, overcharged a 75-year-old farmer in his late father's herringbone drill jacket on a Tuesday morning in March of 1979, and how 11 weeks later that same farmer walked back through the same front door in the same coat, set 2 envelopes on the same counter, paid the published price for the 4640 he came in for, fired the salesman who had quoted him $7,850 above invoice, kept the salesman's father on the floor with a probation and a new pricing policy, and drove home to drink a 4-cup coffee toast at his late wife's place at the kitchen table. The drill jacket is still on the peg by the back door. The cap is still on the peg above it. The pockets are still mended, and every spring morning from March through June, until he's no longer able, Halvor Steinbrenner walks out under the same coat to look at the corn his daddy planted and his granddaddy broke. And that, friends, that is the story.